I'm Ivana, 32, an architect who spent years saving to buy my grandmother's historic family home. We were incredibly close, and she always promised me her beautiful Victorian house would be mine someday. Then, after she passed away, my brother Jason suddenly claimed it belonged to him. When the entire family sided with him, I felt completely abandoned. But I discovered something that changed everything. Before I tell you the story of betrayal and how I fought for what was rightfully mine, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that might help you navigate your own family struggles. Growing up in a middle-class family in Connecticut, my childhood was fairly typical. Our parents, Margaret and Robert, raised my younger brother, Jason, and me in a comfortable suburban home. We weren't wealthy, but we never lacked for anything essential. Our family was close-knit, or at least I thought we were. Jason was 4 years younger than me, and like many siblings, we had our share of rivalries and fights, but generally got along well enough. The true magic of my childhood came from my grandmother, Eleanor. She owned a stunning Victorian house that had been in our family for generations. Built in the late 1800s, it stood as a testament to classic American architecture with its wraparound porch, intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a turret that offered views of the entire neighborhood. Every weekend, my parents would take us to visit Grandma Eleanor, and those visits became the highlight of my week. From the moment I first set foot in that house at age 6, I was captivated. While Jason would quickly grow bored and go outside to play, I would wander from room to room mesmerized by the craftsmanship that modern homes simply didn't have. The hand-carved banisters, the ceiling medallions, the built-in bookshelves, the secret reading nook under the stairs all felt magical to me. "You have an old soul, Ivana," Grandma Eleanor would say, smiling, as she watched me trace the patterns in the woodwork or stare up at the stained glass. "This house needs someone who appreciates its soul." By the time I was 12, I had decided I would become an architect. My bedroom walls were covered with sketches of buildings, most of them variations of Victorian designs, inspired by Grandma's house. My parents encouraged my interest, buying me books on architecture and taking me to historic districts in nearby towns. "She gets that from your side of the family, Mom," my father would tell Grandma Eleanor. That artistic eye skipped a generation and landed right on Ivana. Throughout high school, while other kids changed their career goals monthly, I remained steadfast. I took extra art classes, studied mathematics diligently, knowing both would serve me well in architecture. Jason, meanwhile, bounced between interests, sports, video games, business ideas, none sticking for long. Our parents never pressured him to settle on anything, assuring him he would find his path. When it came time for college, I worked hard to earn a partial scholarship to a university with an excellent architecture program. It was 3 hours from home, but only 45 minutes from Grandma Eleanor's house. This proximity was no coincidence in my choice of schools. While my parents visited once a semester, I spent nearly every weekend with Grandma, helping her maintain the aging house and soaking up her stories about its history. "Did I ever tell you about the secret compartment your great-grandfather built into the library wall?" she would ask, revealing another hidden treasure of the house. Or about the time your great-great-grandmother hosted a suffragette meeting in the parlor, when such gatherings were still controversial. Each story deepened my connection to the house and my determination to preserve it someday. Grandma Eleanor noticed my passion, and one weekend when I was 25 and working at my first job at an architectural firm, she made me a promise that changed my life. "Ivana, my darling," she said, as we sat on her porch swing watching the sunset. "This house has been in our family for generations, but none of your cousins or Jason seem to care about it. They see it as an old, drafty place that costs too much to heat and maintain. But you see its soul." She took my hand in hers, her skin paper thin, but her grip still surprisingly strong. "I want you to have this house when I'm gone, not as an inheritance, but as a purchase. I know you'd never want it for free, stubborn as you are about making your own way. So I'll make you a deal. Save what you can, and when the time comes, you can buy it at a family price. That way no one can ever say you didn't earn it." I hugged her tightly, tears in my eyes, overwhelmed by her understanding of both my love for the house and my need to feel I'd earned it on my own merits. From that day forward, every financial decision I made was influenced by what I called the house fund. I lived in a tiny apartment with a roommate to save on rent. I brought lunch to work instead of buying it. I drove the same reliable but unfashionable car for years. When friends went on exotic vacations, I took affordable road trips or stayed home. Every promotion and bonus went straight into my savings account. All the while, I visited Grandma Eleanor regularly, helping her maintain the property. I fixed leaky faucets, painted weathered trim, and mowed the lawn when her usual gardener wasn't available. We would sit together afterward drinking lemonade and planning the renovations I would someday make. I would keep all the original features. I would explain eagerly, but update the electrical and plumbing systems, restore the woodwork to its original glory, perhaps add some discreet modern amenities in the kitchen and bathrooms. "It sounds wonderful, dear," she would say, her eyes twinkling. "This old house deserves someone who will love it properly." As years passed, Grandma Eleanor's health began to decline. She developed arthritis that made navigating the stairs difficult, and later early signs of cognitive decline appeared. My parents suggested she move to an assisted living facility, but Grandma stubbornly refused. "I'll leave this house feet first or not at all," she declared. I began visiting more frequently to help her manage. Jason, who had finally settled into running a small business selling custom furniture, rarely visited, always claiming he was too busy with work. Our parents visited monthly, but the burden of checking on Grandma fell largely to me, not that I minded. By the time I turned 32, I had saved enough to purchase the house at the family price Grandma and I had discussed. I was just waiting for the right moment to bring up finalizing our arrangement when everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in October, when I got the call that would alter the course of my life. I was working late at the architectural firm, finalizing designs for a client's eco-friendly home renovation, when my phone rang. My mother's voice sounded thin and strained. "Ivana, it's Grandma Eleanor. She's had a stroke. The neighbor found her when she went to deliver some mail that had been misdelivered. We're at Memorial Hospital now." My blood ran cold. "How bad is it?" A pause. "It's serious, honey. You should come now." I didn't even stop to shut down my computer properly. I grabbed my purse and coat, called out a hasty explanation to my colleague as I ran past his desk and drove to the hospital, with my heart pounding against my ribs. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I rushed toward the intensive care unit. I found my parents in the waiting room, their faces drawn with worry. My father stood as soon as he saw me, enveloping me in a tight hug. "The doctor is with her now," he explained. "We're just waiting to hear more." "Where's Jason?" I asked, looking around for my brother. "We called him. He's on his way, but he was at a client meeting 2 hours away." My mother explained, her voice mechanical, as if she was reciting information without processing it. The doctor emerged half an hour later, his expression grave. "She's stabilized, but the stroke was severe. There's significant brain damage. You can see her now, but I should warn you, she's unconscious, and we're not certain if she'll regain consciousness." We filed into her room, the beeping of monitors providing a rhythmic backdrop to our shock. Grandma Eleanor, who had always seemed so vibrant despite her age, lay still and small in the hospital bed tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. Her silver hair was splayed across the pillow, and her face, usually animated with expression, was slack. I took her hand gently, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Grandma, it's Ivana. I'm here. Mom and Dad, too. We love you." There was no response, not even a flicker of her eyelids. Tears streamed down my face as I realized our last conversation about her garden's spring bulbs might truly be our final exchange. Jason arrived around midnight, his face ashen. He gave me an awkward side hug before approaching the bed. "Damn," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. "I should have visited more." We spent the night taking shifts at her bedside, but by morning it was clear Grandma Eleanor wasn't going to recover. Her vital signs began failing around noon, and at 2:17 p.m., with all of us gathered around her, she took her final breath. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and notifications to extended family. As the only one not working full-time, my brother's business supposedly required his constant attention, and my parents were both still employed. I took charge of most of the logistics. I contacted the funeral home, wrote the obituary, and coordinated with the church Grandma had attended for 60 years. Throughout these busy days, I kept expecting someone to mention the house in our arrangement. but no one did. My parents spoke vaguely about dealing with the estate later and giving everyone time to grieve first. I didn't push the issue, assuming we would address it after the funeral. The service was beautiful with the church filled to capacity. Grandma Eleanor had been beloved in the community, and people shared stories of her generosity and sharp wit. I spoke briefly about her influence on my life and career, choking up, as I described how she had encouraged my love of architecture from an early age. After the reception at the church, I decided to visit the house. I hadn't been there since before Grandma's stroke, and I needed to connect with her memory in the place she had loved most. I drove the familiar route, each landmark bringing back memories of trips to visit her over the years. The house stood silent when I arrived, its windows dark. Using the key Grandma had given me years ago, I let myself in. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books enveloped me as I stepped into the foyer. I walked through the room, slowly touching furniture pieces I had known all my life, looking at photographs in silver frames, remembering. In the library, I sat in Grandma's favorite armchair and allowed myself to fully feel the grief I had been holding at bay while handling arrangements. I cried until my throat was raw, mourning not just Grandma Eleanor, but also the conversations we would never have, the stories she would never tell me about the house and our family. Eventually, my tears subsided, and I found myself thinking practically again. I began making mental notes of immediate maintenance needs. The gutter on the east side needed reattachment. The back porch steps had a worrying wobble. The ancient water heater probably needed replacement soon. I was so absorbed in my assessment that I didn't hear the front door open. The sound of footsteps in the hallway startled me, and I stood quickly, my heart racing. "Hello?" I called out. Jason appeared in the doorway, looking surprised to see me. "Oh, you're here." "I needed some time with the house," I explained, wiping the remnants of tears from my cheeks. "What about you?" "I thought you went back to your office after the reception." Something flickered across his face, an expression I couldn't quite read. "I wanted to take a look around, start thinking about what needs to be done." The phrasing struck me as odd. "What do you mean?" Jason walked into the room, running his hand along the bookshelf, in a proprietary way that made me uneasy. "Well, someone's got to take inventory, figure out what to keep, what to sell, what to do with the place itself." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "The house isn't going to be sold, Jason. Grandma and I had an arrangement. I'm buying it." He raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "An arrangement? What arrangement?" "She promised to sell it to me years ago. We've been planning it since I was 25. Jason laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Well, plans change, sis. This house will be mine soon. Better start getting used to the idea." I stared at him, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about? Grandma wanted me to have it. She knew how much I love it." "Did you get that in writing?" he asked, his tone smug. "Because unless you did, it doesn't really matter what conversations you think you had." Before I could respond, he checked his watch and headed for the door. "Anyway, I've got to run. Big client meeting tomorrow. Don't get too attached to any of this stuff. I'll probably sell most of it." He left me standing in the library, shocked and confused. Surely he was just lashing out from grief. Jason had never shown any interest in the house before. In fact, he had often complained about its age and the maintenance it required, calling it a money pit and an anchor around Grandma's neck. That night, I called my parents to tell them about the strange encounter. "Mom, Jason was at the house today, acting like he's going to inherit it. That's not right. Grandma promised it to me. We had an agreement that I would buy it from her estate." My mother's response was oddly evasive. "Well, honey, these things are complicated. Nothing was finalized, and we'll have to see what Grandma's will actually says." "What do you mean, see what it says? You know how much that house means to me. You know Grandma wanted me to have it." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," my father chimed in from the extension. "The will reading is next week. Everything will be sorted out legally." Their responses left me with a growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange premonition that the battle for Grandma Eleanor's house was just beginning. The day of the will reading dawned gray and drizzly, matching my apprehensive mood. I'd spent the week since our funeral in a state of anxiety, replaying Jason's strange comments and my parents' evasive responses. I'd also made several calls to Grandma's lawyer trying to confirm our arrangement about the house, but his secretary kept telling me he couldn't discuss any details until the official reading. I arrived at the lawyer's office 20 minutes early, dressed in a professional black pantsuit that felt like armor. The firm occupied an entire floor of a downtown office building with a reception area featuring leather furniture and law books displayed behind glass. I gave my name to the receptionist and took a seat watching the elevator doors for the arrival of my family. My parents came next looking solemn in their dark clothing. My mother gave me a quick, nervous hug while my father patted my shoulder awkwardly. They sat across from me rather than beside me, a small detail that felt significant somehow. "Have you spoken to Jason?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "He'll be here," my mother replied, not meeting my eyes. Other family members began arriving: Aunt Patricia and Uncle George from my mother's side, Cousin Michael and his wife Bethany, Dad's sister, Aunt Sarah, and her husband. Everyone exchanged subdued greetings, the recent funeral still fresh in everyone's minds. Jason was the last to arrive, walking in 5 minutes late, wearing a sharply tailored suit that looked new. He nodded at the assembled family and took the last remaining seat, which happened to be next to my parents. I couldn't help noticing that they shifted slightly to make room for him, a small gesture of welcome they hadn't extended to me. The receptionist led us to a conference room where Mr. Blackwell, Grandma Eleanor's lawyer for decades, waited. He was in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. Files were arranged neatly in front of him. "Thank you all for coming," he began after we were seated. "I know this is a difficult time. Eleanor was a remarkable woman who will be deeply missed." Murmurs of agreement circulated around the table. "As you know, we're here for the reading of Eleanor Montgomery's last will and testament. She was very specific about her wishes, and I'll do my best to explain everything clearly." My heart pounded as Mr. Blackwell opened the file and began reading. The first portions were standard legal language, establishing the document as her last will and testament, revoking all previous wills. Then he moved on to the specific bequests. "To my daughter Margaret, I leave my collection of antique jewelry, including the pearl necklace passed down from my mother." My mother nodded, tears in her eyes. "To my son-in-law Robert, I leave my collection of first edition books, which I know he has admired over the years." Dad smiled sadly. Mr. Blackwell continued through the list. Aunt Patricia received Grandma's collection of hand-painted china. Uncle George got her set of vintage fishing gear. Cousin Michael was left a modest cash bequest for his children's education fund. Various items of furniture, art, and sentimental objects were distributed among the family members. I waited anxiously for mention of the house, but it didn't come until nearly the end. "Regarding the property at 247 Maple Street, including the Victorian house and surrounding land," I leaned forward slightly, my breath catching. "I leave this property to my grandson Jason Montgomery, with the hope that he will preserve its historic character." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gasped audibly, drawing glances from around the table. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. "I'm sorry," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "There must be some error. Grandma and I had an agreement about the house. I was going to buy it from her estate." Mr. Blackwell looked at me over his glasses. "I'm afraid there's no mention of such an arrangement in the will, Ms. Montgomery. The house is clearly bequeathed to Jason." "When was this will written?" I asked, my mind racing. "It was executed 3 months ago," he replied, checking the date. "Eleanor was of sound mind at the time of signing." 3 months ago, when Grandma's cognitive decline had become more noticeable, when Jason had suddenly started visiting her more frequently after years of minimal contact. I turned to look at my brother, who was maintaining a solemn expression, though I could detect a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "This isn't right," I said firmly. "Grandma promised me that house. We had a plan. I've been saving for years to buy it." "Ivana," my mother said quietly, a warning in her tone, "this isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Mom?" "When Jason sells it to developers who will tear it down." "Grandma knew how much that house meant to me." Jason cleared his throat. "Actually, I've already been in talks with Horizon Development. They're very interested in the property. The land alone is worth a considerable amount." "Horizon Development," I echoed, horrified. "The company that's been putting up those cookie-cutter condos all over town." You can't be serious. It's a smart business move, Jason replied calmly. The house needs too much work to be practical. The land is the real asset. I felt sick. They'll demolish it. Everything that makes it special will be gone. That's progress, Jason shrugged. Grandma understood that things change. No, she didn't. She loved that house. She would never have wanted it destroyed. Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. If I may continue with the reading. I fell silent, but my mind was reeling. As he finished reading the will distributing the remainder of Grandma's assets, I barely listened. I kept replaying conversations with Grandma about the house, our plans, her promise. How could she have changed her mind so completely? When the reading concluded, family members began to disperse, some offering awkward condolences that felt hollow. I remained seated, staring at the polished conference table. Ivana, my father said, touching my shoulder. We should go. I looked up at him. Did you know about the house? He exchanged a glance with my mother. We knew Eleanor had changed her will recently. She mentioned wanting to provide for Jason's future. What about my future? What about the plans she and I made together for years? Jason needs this honey, my mother said softly. His business has been struggling. The money from the property sale will help him get back on his feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So my dreams don't matter. All the years I spent saving, planning, helping Grandma maintain that house, that all means nothing because Jason needs a bailout for his failing business. You have a stable career, my father argued. Jason is still finding his way. He's 38 years old. When does he have to start taking responsibility for his own choices? Jason, who had been speaking with Mr. Blackwell, approached our group. Look, Ivana, I know you're disappointed. But this is what Grandma wanted. It's all legal and above board. I stood up, gathering my purse and coat. I don't believe you. I don't believe Grandma would do this to me. Something isn't right here, and I'm going to find out what it is. Don't make this ugly, Jason warned, his pleasant facade slipping slightly. The will is clear. The house is mine. My parents looked uncomfortable but said nothing to defend me. I can't believe you're all going along with this, I said, my voice breaking. Grandma wanted me to have that house. She promised it to me. Promises aren't legally binding, dear, Aunt Patricia chimed in, apparently feeling the need to add her unwanted opinion. Jason has the legal right now. I looked around at my family, suddenly feeling like I was among strangers. No one was standing up for me, or even acknowledging how wrong this felt. This isn't over, I said quietly, and walked out of the conference room alone, the weight of betrayal heavy on my shoulders. The days following the will reading were among the darkest of my life. I returned to my apartment in a fog of disbelief and betrayal, barely able to function. I called in sick to work for the first time in years, unable to focus on architectural drawings when my own foundations had been so thoroughly shaken. My phone rang repeatedly with calls from my parents, but I let them go to voicemail. Their messages were a mixture of concern and admonishment, suggesting I should accept the situation and think about Jason's needs too. Not once did they acknowledge the deep injustice of what had happened. On the third day of my self-imposed isolation, as I sat on my sofa staring blankly at a cold cup of tea, a moment of clarity cut through the fog of my despair. Grandma Eleanor had been the strongest woman I'd ever known. She had raised her children alone after my grandfather died, young maintained the historic house on her own, and never backed down from what she believed was right. What would Grandma do? I whispered to the empty room. The answer was clear: she would fight. I showered, dressed in clean clothes, and made 2 important calls. The first was to my office, explaining that I needed another week of personal leave to handle a family situation. My boss, who had known about my grandmother's passing, was understanding. The second call was to a lawyer friend, Alicia Torres, whom I had met through a historic preservation committee we both served on. She specialized in estate law. I need your help, I told her, explaining the situation with the will and my prior arrangement with Grandma. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Alicia said firmly. Bring any documentation you have of this arrangement, notes, emails, witnesses, anything. That night, I dug through years of papers assembling evidence of my agreement with Grandma. I found birthday cards where she had written about your future in the house, email printouts where we had discussed renovation plans and photos of us working on maintenance projects together. It wasn't a signed contract, but it was something. The next morning, Alicia listened intently as I laid out my case, examining each document I provided. The situation doesn't look great, she admitted when I finished. Verbal agreements about real estate are tricky to enforce, especially against a clear written will. But there are some red flags here. The timing of the new will, your grandmother's cognitive decline, your brother's sudden interest, we might have grounds to challenge. What would that involve? It would mean investigating the circumstances under which the new will was created. Was your grandmother truly of sound mind? Was there undue influence? Did Jason manipulate her in some way? It would also mean legal fees, potential depositions, and unfortunately, more family conflict. I took a deep breath. I'm prepared for that. That house meant everything to Grandma, and she wanted me to preserve it. I can't let Jason sell it to developers who will demolish it. All right then, Alicia nodded. We'll file to contest the will. In the meantime, I suggest you start your own investigation. Talk to anyone who was in contact with your grandmother in her final months, caregivers, friends, neighbors, and see if you can access her financial records. If there was manipulation, there might be a paper trail. With a plan in place, I felt energized for the first time since Grandma's death. I started methodically creating a list of people to contact. Mrs. Abernathy next door, who had brought Grandma fresh baked goods weekly. Reverend Phillips, who had visited her for home communion when she couldn't make it to church. Sandra Wilson, the home health aide who had started coming 3 times a week in the past year. I began with Mrs. Abernathy bringing her a houseplant as a pretext for visiting. At 85, she was sharp as a tack and immediately understood my concerns. Your brother did start coming around more in those last few months, she confirmed, pouring tea into delicate cups. I was surprised given how rarely he visited before. Always after dark too, which I thought was odd. Your grandmother would be tired by then. Did she ever mention changing her will or her plans for the house? Mrs. Abernathy frowned. Not to me, quite the opposite, in fact. Just last summer, she was telling me all about how you were going to restore the original kitchen when you took over the house. She was so proud of your preservation plans. This pattern repeated with each person I spoke to. No one had heard Grandma express any intention to leave the house to Jason. In fact, several people confirmed she had explicitly told them about our arrangement. Sandra Wilson, the home health aide, provided the most disturbing information. I didn't like the way your brother acted around your grandmother, she told me when I visited her at her apartment. He would come when she was on her evening medication, the ones that made her drowsy. Then he'd bring papers for her to sign saying they were for his business. My breath caught. Did you ever see what the papers were? No, he was careful about that. But one time I came back into the room sooner than he expected, and he got very upset, practically shoved the papers into his briefcase. Your grandmother seemed confused. Afterward, asked me what she had just signed. I reported it to my supervisor, but since your grandmother hadn't been declared incompetent, there wasn't much we could do except note it in her file. Do you think you could provide a statement about this to my lawyer? Absolutely, Sandra said firmly. What happened wasn't right. With each conversation, the picture became clearer. Jason had systematically taken advantage of Grandma's vulnerable state to manipulate her into changing her will. But I still needed more concrete evidence. I decided to visit the house again, hoping to find financial records or other documentation. I still had my key, and as far as I knew, Jason hadn't changed the locks yet. When I arrived, the house was quiet. I went straight to Grandma's small home office where she had kept her important papers in an antique roll-top desk. Most of the obvious documents were gone, probably taken by Mr. Blackwell or Jason. But Grandma had been old school about record-keeping, maintaining paper copies of everything. I searched methodically through each drawer, finding bank statements that showed several large checks written to Jason in the months before her death. In the back of a filing cabinet, I discovered a folder labeled House Future. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me dated 2 years earlier, explicitly stating her intention to sell me the house at a family price and detailing our arrangement. There was also a draft sales agreement that had never been finalized and a property appraisal. The most shocking discovery came when I checked the secret compartment in the library wall, the one Grandma had shown me years ago. Inside was a small fireproof box I'd never seen before. Using a letter opener to pry it open, I found several documents inside, including a legal agreement dated 5 years earlier. The document properly notarized outlined an arrangement whereby I would provide ongoing maintenance and future preservation of the house in exchange for the right to purchase it at a specified price upon Grandma's death. It wasn't a will, but a separate legal contract, and one that could potentially override the terms of the newer will. My hands shaking with excitement, I photographed every document with my phone before carefully returning everything exactly as I'd found it. I didn't want Jason to know I was building a case. On my way out, I checked the mailbox and found several letters addressed to Grandma, including a bank statement. While I knew opening someone else's mail was technically illegal, I justified it as necessary given the circumstances. The statement showed a pattern of withdrawals that coincided with Jason's visits according to the dates Sandra had mentioned. Armed with this new evidence, I met again with Alicia. She reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly confident. "This changes everything," she said, holding up the legal agreement I'd found in the secret compartment. "This is a binding contract separate from the will. It gives you the right to purchase the property regardless of what the will states. So I can stop Jason from selling to developers. We need to act quickly, but yes, I'll file an injunction to prevent any sale while we assert your contractual rights. The evidence of manipulation will help our case as well." For the first time since the will reading, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had concrete evidence of Grandma's true wishes and Jason's manipulation. The fight was just beginning, but now I had ammunition. News of my legal challenge spread through the family like wildfire. The day after Alicia filed the injunction, my phone exploded with messages and calls from relatives, most expressing shock that I would create such drama and tear the family apart over a house. My mother left a tearful voicemail. "Ivana, what are you doing? This is going to destroy our family. Jason is devastated that you're accusing him of such terrible things. Please drop this before it's too late." My father's message was more direct. "This isn't how we raised you to behave. Families should support each other, not file lawsuits. Call us immediately so we can talk some sense into you." I listened to each message with growing disappointment, noting that no one seemed concerned about Jason's apparent manipulation of our vulnerable grandmother, or the fact that he planned to demolish a historic family home for profit. The narrative had somehow become that I was the villain for daring to fight back. After consulting with Alicia, I decided to send a group email to the entire family laying out my position calmly and clearly. I explained my long-standing arrangement with Grandma, attached photos of the legal agreement I discovered, and outlined the evidence of Jason's suspicious behavior during Grandma's decline. "I'm not doing this to create conflict," I wrote in conclusion. "I'm fighting to honor Grandma Eleanor's true wishes and to preserve the historic home she loved so much. Jason plans to sell it to developers who will demolish it. Is that really what any of you believe Grandma would have wanted?" The responses were mixed. Most relatives doubled down on their support for Jason, calling my evidence circumstantial and suggesting I was twisting things out of jealousy. But to my surprise, Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, replied privately with a very different message. "I believe you, Ivana," she wrote. "Eleanor told me about your arrangement years ago. She was so happy knowing the house would be in your loving care someday. Something felt wrong at the will reading, but I didn't have the courage to speak up. I do now. Let me know how I can help." Aunt Sarah's support gave me renewed strength. We arranged to meet for coffee the next day at a cafe far from any family members' homes or workplaces. Jason visited Eleanor 3 times when I was there. Aunt Sarah told me, her voice low despite the bustling cafe around us. Each time he brought documents for her to sign. Once I asked what they were, and he said they were related to his business insurance that needed a family member as guarantor. Eleanor seemed confused but trusted him. "Did you see her sign anything?" "Yes, but I never saw the actual documents. Jason was very protective of them, always positioning himself, so I couldn't see the text. I thought it was odd, but didn't want to seem nosy." "Would you be willing to provide a statement to my lawyer about this?" Aunt Sarah hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Your parents would be furious. We've never had a family rift like this before." "The rift already exists, Aunt Sarah. I'm just the only one acknowledging it. Jason manipulated Grandma and is trying to profit from it by destroying something she treasured. If we all stay silent, we're complicit." She nodded slowly. You're right. Eleanor deserves better than this. I'll speak to your lawyer. With Aunt Sarah's testimony added to Sandra's plus the documentary evidence I'd gathered, Alicia felt confident about our position. The injunction was granted, temporarily preventing Jason from selling the property while our case proceeded. Jason's response was swift and vicious. He hired an expensive attorney who specialized in contested wills and filed a countersuit claiming I was harassing him and trespassing on his property. He also changed the locks on the house and installed security cameras. The next blow came when I discovered Jason had been removing items from the house heirloom furniture artwork, even architectural elements like antique doorknobs and light fixtures. Through Alicia, I demanded an inventory and halt to any removals which the judge granted. As legal proceedings continued, the family split into factions. Most relatives sided with Jason, viewing him as the rightful heir, being persecuted by his jealous sister. Only Aunt Sarah and two distant cousins who had been close to Grandma publicly supported me. My parents tried to maintain a neutral position, but their attempts to pressure me into dropping the case made their true allegiance clear. We're having Thanksgiving at Jason's this year, my mother informed me during one of her rare calls. We'd love you to come, but you need to promise not to mention the house situation. So I'm supposed to pretend everything is fine while sitting in Jason's home discussing what a wonderful son he is? I asked incredulously. This is exactly the attitude that's keeping you isolated from the family. She sighed. Jason is willing to move past this if you are. Move past this, Mom. He stole Grandma's house through manipulation and plans to destroy it for profit. There's no moving past that. The holidays came and went without me. I spent Thanksgiving with friends and Christmas with Alicia and her family, who had kindly adopted me into their celebrations after hearing about my situation. The absence of my own family was painful, but their conditional love hurt even more. In January, we had a breakthrough. Alicia had subpoenaed Grandma's medical records, which clearly documented her cognitive decline over the previous year. More importantly, her doctor had noted concerns about her capacity to make complex decisions in the months before she died, precisely when the new will had been executed. We also obtained records from Mr. Blackwell's office through legal discovery. These revealed that Jason had been the one to contact the lawyer about creating a new will, claiming Grandma was updating her wishes. Mr. Blackwell had met with Grandma only once, with Jason present the entire time, something that raised serious ethical questions about whether she had been able to express her true wishes freely. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. The notary who had witnessed the new will contacted Alicia after seeing a local news story about our case. I've been troubled by that signing ever since it happened, the notary Mrs. Patel explained when we met at Alicia's office. The elderly lady seemed confused and kept asking her grandson to explain what she was signing. He would say things like, "It's just what we discussed, Grandma," without giving specifics. I asked to speak with her alone, which is my standard practice, but he refused to leave the room, saying she needed him there to understand the documents. Why did you notarize it if you had concerns? Alicia asked gently. Mrs. Patel looked down, clearly uncomfortable. The grandson was very insistent. He kept saying his grandmother would be upset if there were delays. I should have trusted my instincts and refused, but I didn't want to cause a scene. It's been bothering my conscience ever since. Her testimony was powerful, suggesting not only that Grandma had been confused during the signing, but also that Jason had deliberately prevented her from receiving independent advice about what she was signing. By February, we had accumulated enough evidence that Alicia suggested we try to settle the case before going to trial. She arranged a meeting with Jason and his attorney, hoping to negotiate a resolution that would honor the original agreement between Grandma and me. Jason refused to attend in person, participating only via his lawyer. The offer they presented was insulting. I could purchase a small portion of the land at full market value, but the house and most of the property would still be sold to developers. This isn't a negotiation, I told Alicia after their offer. It's a dismissal of everything we've proven. We need to take this all the way. Are you sure? She asked. Trials are expensive and emotionally draining. And even if we win, your relationship with your family may never recover. I thought about the family that had so easily abandoned me when I stood up for what was right. Some relationships aren't worth saving if they're built on lies and manipulation. Grandma deserves justice, and that house deserves to be preserved. We're going to trial. The day of our family meeting arrived with a tension so thick, it felt like storm clouds gathering over my parents' suburban home. I had arranged this confrontation carefully coordinating with Alicia to ensure all our evidence was organized and irrefutable. After months of gathering testimonies, documents, and financial records, I was ready to reveal the truth to everyone. I arrived 30 minutes early, parking down the street to center myself before entering the battlefield. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed my notes one final time. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about exposing a betrayal that ran deeper than I had initially understood. Aunt Sarah arrived next, giving me a quick supportive hug before we walked to the front door together. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, ringing the doorbell. My mother answered, her smile strained as she hugged Aunt Sarah warmly and me perfunctorily. The living room had been arranged with chairs in a rough circle reminiscent of an intervention. My father stood by the fireplace looking uncomfortable. A few other relatives were already seated: Uncle George and Aunt Patricia, cousin Michael and his wife, and two of my mother's cousins whom I rarely saw. "Jason is running a few minutes late," my mother announced, offering refreshments that I politely declined. My stomach was too knotted to consider eating or drinking anything. When Jason finally arrived, he wasn't alone. He brought his lawyer, Mr. Richards, a silver-haired man with an intimidating scowl, and an unfamiliar woman he introduced as Stephanie from Horizon Development. "I thought this was a family meeting," I said evenly, looking directly at Jason. "It is," he replied with artificial pleasantness. "But since you've chosen to make this a legal matter, I brought legal representation. And Stephanie is here to explain the development plans that will benefit everyone." I noticed he had positioned his allies strategically around the room. My parents sat closest to him, with his lawyer on the other side. The developer took a seat near my father, immediately engaging him in quiet conversation. "Before we begin," Jason announced, standing to address the group, "I want to thank everyone for coming. I know the situation has been difficult for all of us. My hope is that today we can find a resolution that allows our family to heal and move forward together." It was a masterful performance designed to position him as the reasonable peacemaker and me as the troublemaker. I remained silent, waiting for my moment. Jason continued. "Stephanie has brought some renderings of the condominium development plan for Grandma's property. The good news is that they've agreed to name the complex the Eleanor in her honor, and they'll preserve some of the original architectural elements in the common areas." And Stephanie stood unfolding large architectural renderings that showed a generic multi-unit building with a few token Victorian details tacked on. "We're very excited about this project," she began. "The location is ideal for luxury condominiums, and we believe these units will sell quickly, providing a substantial return on investment for the Montgomery family." I noticed several relatives nodding appreciatively at the mention of financial returns. Jason had clearly primed them to expect a share of the profits, though I knew from the will that he was under no obligation to distribute anything. "We understand there's been some family disagreement about the property," Stephanie continued, glancing sympathetically toward me. "So we've developed a compromise solution. We can preserve the facade of the original house and incorporate it into the new development." "Preserving just the facade isn't preservation," I interjected, unable to remain silent. "It's architectural taxidermy." "The soul of the house would be gone," Jason sighed dramatically. "And this is exactly why we're at an impasse. Ivana refuses to accept any practical solution. She's living in a fantasy world where maintaining a deteriorating old house somehow makes financial sense." "This isn't about finances," I replied calmly. "It's about honoring Grandma's wishes. And speaking of her wishes, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." I opened my portfolio and removed the first document, a copy of the legal agreement between Grandma and me. "This is a binding contract signed and notarized 5 years ago, giving me the right to purchase the house at an agreed-upon price. It was executed when Grandma was in full possession of her faculties with independent legal advice." I handed copies to everyone in the room, including Jason's lawyer, whose expression darkened as he scanned the document. "Where did you get this?" Jason demanded, his pleasant facade cracking slightly. From the secret compartment in the library wall, the one Grandma showed me years ago because she trusted me with the house's secrets. Mr. Richards whispered something to Jason, who visibly tensed. That's just one document, Jason countered. The will supersedes any prior arrangements. Ordinarily, perhaps, I agreed, but not when the will was obtained through undue influence and manipulation of someone with diminished capacity. I distributed my next pieces of evidence. Grandma's medical records documenting her cognitive decline statements, from her doctor expressing concerns about her decision-making capacity, and testimonies from her caregiver and Aunt Sarah about Jason's suspicious behavior. Jason visited Grandma primarily when she was medicated and drowsy, I explained to the stunned family members. He brought documents for her to sign without adequate explanation, prevented her from receiving independent advice, and deliberately scheduled these visits when no one else was present, except occasionally Aunt Sarah or the caregiver whom he tried to dismiss. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet, with several relatives shifting awkwardly in their seats. My mother's face had gone pale, while my father stared fixedly at the floor. "This is absurd," Jason sputtered. "You're twisting innocent visits to our grandmother into some conspiracy theory." "Then how do you explain these?" I produced copies of bank statements showing large withdrawals from Grandma's account coinciding with Jason's visits and corresponding deposits to his business account. "Grandma gave you over $70,000 in the last year of her life at precisely the times you brought her business documents to sign." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Even Jason's staunchest supporters looked troubled. "Grandma was helping me with my business," Jason insisted. "She wanted to invest in my future. She was confused and being taken advantage of," I corrected firmly. "And here's proof." My final piece of evidence was a recording Alicia had helped me obtain legally, a conversation with the notary who had witnessed the new will. Mrs. Patel's voice filled the room, describing how uncomfortable she had been during the signing, how confused Grandma had seemed, and how Jason had refused to leave the room to allow her to confirm Grandma's wishes independently. "This is a violation of notary protocol," I explained. "A notary is required to verify that the signer understands what they're signing and is doing so willingly without coercion. That verification didn't happen because Jason wouldn't allow it." Jason's lawyer whispered urgently to him again, his expression grave. Jason's face had flushed deep red, and he stood abruptly. "This is all circumstantial," he shouted. "You have no proof I did anything wrong." "Actually, we do," I replied calmly. "The combination of the medical evidence, financial transactions, witness testimonies, and notary statement creates a compelling case for undue influence. Our lawyer believes it's more than enough to invalidate the will in court." "You're just jealous," Jason lashed out. "You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad love me more. That's what this is really about." The outburst hung in the air, shocking even his supporters. My parents looked mortified. "Jason, please," my mother began, but he cut her off. "No, she's trying to ruin everything. The house is mine. Grandma knew I needed the money more than Ivana needed another project for her perfect little life." In his anger, he had inadvertently confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. This had never been about honoring Grandma's wishes. It had been about Jason's financial gain. "So you admit you needed the money?" I asked quietly. "That this was never about preserving Grandma's legacy or respecting her wishes?" Jason seemed to realize his mistake. He looked desperately at his lawyer, who was already gathering his papers. "I think we need to step outside and discuss our options," Mr. Richards said tersely to Jason. "Now." As they left the room, a heavy silence fell. My parents looked shell-shocked, while other relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Aunt Sarah spoke up. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. "I saw what was happening but didn't want to believe it. Eleanor would be heartbroken to see her house destroyed, especially after promising it to Ivana." "Is all this really true?" my father asked, looking at me directly for the first time that day. "Jason manipulated Mom into changing her will." "The evidence strongly suggests it," I replied gently. "I didn't want to believe it either, Dad, but the facts are clear." And Stephanie from the development company awkwardly gathered her renderings. "I think I should leave. It seems there are some family matters to resolve before any property decisions can be made." After she left, Jason and his lawyer returned. Mr. Richards looked grim as he addressed the room. In light of the evidence presented, we would like to propose a settlement. The will contest would be withdrawn, the original agreement between Eleanor Montgomery and Ivana would be honored, and Jason would return the funds he received from his grandmother's accounts. And if we don't agree, I asked, though I already knew the answer, then we proceed to court, where all of this would become public record, and where, frankly, our position appears weak. My parents exchanged glances, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Jason stood rigidly by the door, his earlier confidence entirely evaporated. I think we should accept the settlement, my father said finally. It honors Mom's original wishes and prevents a public spectacle. One by one, other family members nodded in agreement. Even Aunt Patricia, who had been Jason's most vocal supporter, conceded that the evidence was compelling. Fine, Jason spat bitterly. Take the stupid house, it's falling apart anyway, but don't expect me at family gatherings anymore. As he stormed out, slamming the front door behind him, I felt no triumph, only sadness that it had come to this. But beneath the sadness was a quiet certainty that I had done what Grandma Eleanor would have wanted. Her beloved house would be preserved after all. 3 years have passed since that confrontation in my parents' living room. The settlement was finalized 2 months later, with Jason returning most of Grandma's money and relinquishing all claims to the house. As promised, I purchased it at the family price Grandma and I had agreed upon years earlier, using the savings I had diligently accumulated. The day I received the keys officially, my keys now was both joyful and bittersweet. Walking through the empty rooms, I could almost hear Grandma Eleanor's voice pointing out features she loved or repairs she'd been meaning to make. The southeast corner of the porch needs reinforcing, Ivana, and don't forget to check the attic vent before winter comes. The restoration project was even more extensive than I had anticipated. Decades of deferred maintenance had taken their toll, and some of Jason's hasty removals had caused additional damage. I took a 6-month leave of absence from my architectural firm to focus on the major structural issues living in the house amidst the dust and chaos of renovation. Every decision I made was guided by two principles: historical accuracy and Grandma's preferences. When I found her notes about wanting the kitchen updated while keeping its vintage charm, I honored that vision. When I discovered old photographs showing the original color of the exterior paint, I matched it precisely. The process was slow, expensive, and occasionally frustrating, but deeply satisfying. Family relationships took longer to repair than the house, and some remain fractured to this day. Jason and I haven't spoken since the settlement, though I've heard through the family grapevine that his business eventually failed, and he moved to Arizona to start over. I hope he's found some peace there. My parents struggled to reconcile their image of their son with the evidence of his manipulation. For the first year, our interactions were strained and infrequent. Mom would call occasionally with surface-level conversation, carefully avoiding any mention of the house or Jason. Dad would send brief text messages about practical matters like insurance recommendations for historic homes. The first real thaw came when I invited them to see the completed kitchen restoration. They arrived tentatively, bearing a houseplant and awkward smiles. As they walked through the rooms, seeing the careful preservation of elements Grandma had loved, something shifted. Mom touched the restored banister and whispered, "She would have loved this, Ivana." "I know," I replied simply. "Since then, we've established a new normal. We'll never be as close as we once were. The betrayal cut too deep for that. But we found a way to be family again, with clearer boundaries and expectations. They visit the house several times a year now. And last Christmas, we even managed a family dinner that felt almost comfortable. Aunt Sarah became my strongest ally and friend throughout the restoration process. Having stood by me during the conflict, she took genuine pleasure in watching the house return to its former glory. She often brings lunch and sits with me on the porch swing, sharing stories about Grandma Eleanor that I'd never heard before. "You know," she told me recently, "Eleanor always said you had her spirit. Now I see it clearly. That same determination to stand up for what's right no matter the cost." The wider family has slowly come back into my life as well, in varying degrees. Some, like Aunt Patricia, made genuine apologies for doubting me. Others maintain a polite distance, still uncomfortable with the revelations about Jason, but unwilling to cut ties completely. I've learned to accept these different levels of reconciliation without resentment. Professionally, the restoration project has brought unexpected benefits. My architectural firm was so impressed with the work that they created a new historic preservation division with me as its head. The house has been featured in several design magazines, and I've been invited to speak at preservation conferences across the country. Last spring, I fulfilled another promise to Grandma by creating a memorial garden in the backyard filled with her favorite flowers, roses, hydrangeas, and foxgloves. I placed a small stone bench beneath the ancient maple tree, where she used to read in the summers, with a plaque that simply reads, Eleanor's Garden, for the woman who knew that preserving the past ensures a richer future. Perhaps the most healing aspect of these past 3 years has been the community that has formed around the house. When I began offering occasional tours to architecture students and history buffs, I met people who share my passion for preservation. Some have become dear friends, dropping by to help with projects, or simply to sit on the porch with a glass of lemonade, appreciating the beauty Grandma always saw in this place. Through this painful journey, I've learned profound lessons about family integrity and resilience. I've discovered that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands beside you, when standing alone would be easier. I've learned that fighting for what's right sometimes means being misunderstood or even vilified before the truth emerges. And I've realized that Grandma Eleanor's legacy isn't just this beautiful house, but the courage she instilled in me to protect what matters no matter the cost. The house is now not just a home, but a symbol of perseverance. Every creaking floorboard and leaded glass window tells a story of a promise kept and a heritage preserved. When visitors comment on the love evident in every restored detail, I feel Grandma's presence most strongly, as if she's nodding in approval. Some family wounds may never fully heal, and that's a reality I've come to accept. Jason's betrayal and my parents' initial failure to stand up for what was right created fractures that can be mended but never erased completely. Yet I found that living well with purpose and integrity is its own form of healing. As I sit in Grandma Eleanor's favorite window seat watching the sunset over the garden she loved, I feel a sense of peace that was hard-won but genuine. This house, which became the center of so much conflict, has returned to what it was always meant to be, a home filled with love, history, and the spirit of the remarkable woman who entrusted it to my care. If you've ever had to stand alone for what's right, even when those closest to you didn't understand, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for being here with me today. And remember, family is what we make of it, whether bound by blood or by choice.